A news report just shared that California's Indy McBank is closing down. It was a huge disaster. At GTX, Bobby Walker entered his office. His assistant Nan followed him in and told him that Sally Wilcox was waiting for him in the conference room. Bobby went to the staff room and saw everyone looking sad. He asked what was wrong, but nobody would tell him, so he went to Connell's office. "What happened? Did somebody die?" Bobby asked Connell. Connell explained they had shut down the mobile phone division in Newport News. He also said they had connected the ship system with a rail product. Fancy words for cutting jobs, but making it sound good. Bobby then visited Sally's office and asked what was going on. Sally introduced him to Dick Landry from legal. Landry told Bobby that the company made a change in the division. They would give him benefits for his 12 years of work. Bobby asked if they were firing him. Sally said they would also help him find new work. Bobby got angry and asked if G knew about this. Sally asked him to sit down, but Bobby refused and left. "You know what, Sally? One day he's Bruce Wayne running Wayne Enterprises. The next he's Bobby Walker standing outside GTX with a cardboard box. From rich man to poor man. Even Batman can't escape company job cuts." Bobby started packing to leave. His secretary asked what they said about her job. Bobby told her he didn't ask anything. At Jean's office, Phil was waiting. Jean saw Phil looked worried and asked what was happening. His assistant said Sally fired some workers from the ship system sales group. Jean asked if Sally fired Phil too. Phil said no and admitted he was hiding in the office all day. Phil shouted that he would never let anyone fire him after 30 years of loyal work. 30 years of loyalty gone in 30 seconds. Turns out being loyal doesn't mean your job is safe. Maggie Walker, Bobby's wife, came home. She went outside and found Bobby cooking. She asked why he was home so early. Bobby just said he was making dinner. Maggie reminded him they were supposed to go to Jack's house that night, but Bobby didn't want to go. This made Maggie upset, and she went back inside. Bobby followed her, and they started arguing. "Why won't you come with us?" Maggie asked. "Why do you hate Jack so much?" Finally, Bobby told her the truth. "They fired me today." Maggie was shocked and asked about Jean. She reminded Bobby that Jean had promised to protect his job. Bobby explained that Jean wasn't in the office all day and that Sally Wilcox had made the decision. "Amazing how fast "we're in this together" turns into "sorry, nothing I can do," Bobby said sadly. Meanwhile, Phil went to his house. He asked his daughter, Susan Rico, where her mom was. She told him her mom had a headache. As Phil was about to go upstairs, his daughter called him back. She was excited because they had found out their next trip would be to Italy. She asked if she could go too. Phil told her she would, but he wasn't sure. "A vacation to Italy sounds great if you still have a job to come back to," he thought to himself. Phil went to the bedroom. When his wife saw him, she asked if he had heard about Colin getting fired and if they were okay. Phil told her they were fine and reminded her they needed to get ready for Salinger's dinner. "When your money problems are getting worse, the best answer is a fancy dinner," Phil thought. Then he said, "I completely forgot. You don't have to come if you're not feeling well." "Just give me a minute," his wife replied. At the same time, Jean was standing quietly in front of a table, putting ice in his bottle. His wife came up behind him and told him they had to leave early. She reminded him they shouldn't be late again. Bobby, Maggie, and their children arrived at Jack's home. They went inside and greeted everyone. Jack asked Bobby how he was moving from his high-paying Africa job to another one. While they were talking, the birthday lady came in. Bobby told her she didn't look 35, but more like 21. They both laughed. "Why don't you grab a drink, Bobby? We got some margaritas in the blender we got at the Man of the Year celebration," she said. The host then introduced Gene McClary, Executive Vice President of GTX. At the event, Gann took the stage. He talked about how patient Gene was during the hard times for the company. He praised James for growing GTX into a huge organization. Then Gene invited James to come up front. James thanked everyone and said that building GTX wasn't easy, but Gene's help made it possible. "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Without a doubt, giving pink slips to thousands of workers and then getting awards for being a great leader looks like something a bad guy would do. Even Lex Luthor would be taking notes," Bobby thought to himself. The next day, Bobby went to a job training. When he got there, Danny met him and asked where he was going. Bobby said he was going to orientation, and Danny pointed him to the right room. Inside, a woman told them what they needed for their work. She said that feeling scared and worried were actually helpful in looking for a job. Neighbors, dentists, anybody and everybody, she said about who might help them find jobs. Back at GTX, Gene and the other staff talked about joining the ship systems and rail products divisions. Phil and Nan joined the meeting. The staff complained about having to handle the same number of accounts with half the workers. Phil told them they were lucky to still have jobs in these hard times. Then he changed the subject to how they could get business back. Bobby left the orientation and looked for a place to sit. When he found one, a worker told him the seat was already taken. Danny called Bobby over, offered him a seat, and Bobby thanked him before sitting down. Danny told Bobby that everyone was scared of him because he was new. Yet you're not threatened? Bobby asked Danny. Danny told Bobby that he was a confident person. Danny asked Bobby how long his benefits would last. Bobby explained he had 3 months of full pay and 4 months of job placement help. Later, Gene and Bobby met for lunch. Gene asked Bobby how things were going for him and his family. Bobby told him that everything was fine. Gene explained to Bobby that they had to make cuts because the company was in a serious situation. They needed to reduce staff. Salinger's feeling a lot of pressure to make the stock price higher before somebody buys the company and replaces you, Gene said. Gene then told Bobby he had called some marketers. He named them and gave Bobby a paper with their information. But this made Bobby angry. He dropped the paper and left, saying he would steal clients from them once he started working for their competitors. Bobby went from being loyal to the company to wanting revenge really fast, Bobby thought. Hey, how'd it go? Maggie asked when Bobby got home. Great, Bobby replied. At home, Maggie and Bobby talked about his meeting with Gene. Bobby said Gene was helping him connect with marketers, and Maggie thought that was good. While holding unpaid bills, Maggie suggested getting a job herself to help with money problems. When Bobby's father, Kevin, called, Maggie gave Bobby the phone, but Bobby didn't want to talk to him. He didn't want to hear his dad's advice. What? He read about the layoffs in the paper. So what? Bobby said. At the office, James and Gene talked about good old times. James invited Gene and Cynthia to join them at Sun Valley for New Year's, but Gene wasn't sure. He mentioned his grandchild would be visiting. At home, Gene was lying outside when Cynthia came up and asked if everything was okay. He told her about having lunch with Bobby and how he expected Bobby to throw a drink in his face. Cynthia then said she and Sue were planning a weekend trip to Palm Beach. She asked to use the company plane. Seeing Gene's reaction, she quickly changed her mind. He then headed to an interview, driving separately while Maggie took the kids. Bruce Wayne would just buy another mansion without thinking twice, Bobby thought. But Bobby Walker is holding on to a life he can't afford anymore, hoping nobody notices. At the interview, the interviewer looked at his sales experience and asked about regional sales, which Bobby confirmed he had. She offered him $65,000 per year for a position that wasn't what he applied for. Bobby got angry and told her he made $120,000 at GTX and had applied for VP of Marketing. She said they had many qualified people applying for that job. I'm a highly qualified applicant for that position, Bobby insisted. After that, Bobby went to the office and started calling marketers about job openings, but all the answers were negative. Phil Knight built Nike from nothing into a billion-dollar empire, Bobby thought. But Bobby Walker? At this rate, he'll be lucky to sell sneakers out of his car trunk just to pay rent. Bobby kept calling Sally, leaving voicemail messages when she didn't answer. Hi Sally, Bob Walker here. Thanks for not returning any of my calls, he said sarcastically. Bobby then went back home. Outside, Drew was sitting alone. Bobby asked what was wrong, and Drew told him not to worry. He could handle things because he was growing up. Bobby then told Drew he had lost his job, but promised everything would be fine. I lost my job, Bobby admitted. At Jack's house for Thanksgiving, the men talked about business while the women served food. Jack asked Bobby about work, and Bobby gave a vague answer. Jack mentioned he read that Salinger made 700 times more than the average GTX worker. A timely reminder that the ones at the top rarely feel the pain of those at the bottom, Bobby thought. Before eating, Carson prayed. She thanked God for their health and asked for her dad to find a job, which told everyone that Bobby was unemployed. Jack offered Bobby a job, but he refused. Could always use some extra help this winter, hanging drywall, Jack offered. Meanwhile, James and his business partner talked about money problems. They were thinking about selling the new business or closing the existing one. In the end, they decided to lay off more workers. Gene privately told James he didn't agree with this decision, but James ignored him. I've always told you what I thought, right or wrong, and this is wrong, Gene said. Of course, the first solution is layoffs, not cutting executive pay or changing the company structure, just firing more workers, Gene thought bitterly. Later in bed, Maggie and Bobby talked about money. Maggie said if they lowered their house price, they could sell it for $850,000. She asked why Bobby wouldn't take Jack's job offer. Bobby insisted he wouldn't work under Jack. At this point, pride is the only thing Bobby has left, and he's holding on to it for dear life, Bobby thought about himself. Gene and Sally were also in bed. Gene asked her about how they decided who to fire. Sally got annoyed and left him alone in the bed. That day, Bobby and his teammate went golfing. But Bobby was told he hadn't paid for his membership. He went to Maggie to find out what was happening. Maggie explained they couldn't afford next month's payment. She urged him to stop golfing and find work to pay their mortgage. Bobby wanted to look successful, but Maggie reminded him of their real situation and asked him to cancel his golf plans. Nothing says fall from grace like getting kicked off the golf course, Bobby thought sadly. Later, Bobby and Maggie had a serious talk. Bobby felt hopeless and shouted that at 37, he couldn't even support his family. Maggie comforted him, saying everything would be okay and that his family was there for him. She gave him a warm hug. Bobby went to another job interview. The interviewer mentioned he had a great recommendation from Dan Mass. The job had a $90,000 salary plus commission and bonuses. I can't promise you anything, the man said, but with Dan's recommendation and your resume, you seem like the right person for this job. Finally a lifeline, Bobby thought hopefully. But when he called later to ask about the job, he was told it wasn't available anymore. Later, Bobby watched with a broken heart as someone drove away in the car he had just sold. First the golf membership, now the car, he thought. Bobby is watching his old life disappear piece by piece. At a party, Phil approached Gene and told him that Sally had fired him. Gene went to his office and confronted Sally. She handed him a paper showing he was also fired. Gene and Phil talked about how long they had worked for the company. They felt betrayed. Gene went home but ignored his wife calling him to come upstairs. Meanwhile, Phil started a new job working on the factory floor. At Joanna's office, Phil surprised Bobby and the team. Joanna asked Phil a question about whether he smoked or not. When Phil told Joanna he sometimes smoked, she told him to quit. After that, he left for the office. "You're almost 60 and you look terrible," Joanna said. "You're going to have a hard time out there." Bobby went to Phil's new office and talked to him about having a separate office, saying the company had to pay extra for it. Phil answered that this was the least the company could do for him. Phil then asked Bobby about what clothes to wear, and Bobby told him casual clothes were fine. At home, Bobby was on the phone with a mortgage company. He told them he had talked with someone from their office last week, and they said he hadn't paid for the month. He offered to write a check and send it to them. Maggie came downstairs and listened to his conversation while smiling. After he finished the call, she asked who he was talking to. "The mortgage company," Bobby said. "Which one?" Maggie asked. "American Express," Bobby admitted. Maggie told Bobby that Jed had asked her to work tomorrow night. Bobby reminded her it was New Year's Eve. Then Drew joined them and asked Bobby if he could drive him to Kyle's house. Bobby said he was busy. Disappointed, Drew went back upstairs. "Hey, wanna play some Xbox?" Bobby called after him. "Okay," Drew replied. "Bobby, hang on a sec." Maggie explained that Drew didn't have an Xbox anymore. He had given it back because he knew they couldn't afford it. Nothing hurts more than a kid quietly giving up something they love because they see their parents having money problems, Bobby thought. Bobby then went back to Jack's workplace and asked for a job. "I need a job, Jack," he said simply. He started working that same day. Bobby carried timber while Jack worked on construction. Bobby got tired, and Jack told him to carry 2 more loads. He has played a billionaire and a business big shot. Now he's a guy struggling to carry a piece of wood. That's some real-life character growth, Bobby reflected. They sat and ate lunch in one of the rooms they were working on. Bobby sat separately, looking at his hands. One of Jack's workers came over and told him that the gloves he was using were new, which was why he got blisters. He then gave Bobby an old pair of gloves. It was a small but meaningful moment. Bobby wasn't just learning the job, he was learning to be humble. The next morning, Bobby went to work where he was sandblasting. They told him to add another sack to the mix because it was too thin. Jack watched Bobby and made a sarcastic comment. "Easy job, right? Just like moving cost reports from the outbox to the inbox," Jack teased. Meanwhile, Gene and Sally were at their house. She asked what his plan was for today and told him that Ed and Dana, her old friends, had invited them to dinner tonight. Phil went for a job interview. When he introduced himself at the receptionist told him to sign in and take a seat. There were many people applying, and the line was long. Jack gave Bobby a paycheck. Bobby noticed there was an extra $200 and asked Jack about it. Jack must have made a mistake, Bobby thought. "Must have made a mistake, Bob," Jack said, but told him to keep it. Gene went to dinner with Sally and her old friends. He seemed unhappy, but pretended to be enjoying himself. Jean still playing the role of a man who has control, when in reality he has none, Jean thought about himself. Bobby and his family moved into Bobby's parents' house. Bobby went to Drew's bedroom where Drew was lying in bed with his earphones on. Bobby took off the earphones and asked if Drew was okay with sleeping in the same room as his sister for a while. Drew said it was fine. Once he bought sneakers without looking at the price tag. Now he's deciding which ones to sell just to get by. Phil Knight would be disappointed, Bobby thought sadly. Liam, Gene's son, and his family came to Gene's house. Gene and Liam talked while Billy's family played outside. Gene told Liam that he was trying to get a vineyard in June and was also looking for a job. Liam asked Gene if he had talked to his mother. Liam then told Gene that she was thinking of selling the house and having a hard time. "She's having a pretty rough time. She's talking about selling the house," Liam explained. Bobby went to work. Mike wasn't there, and Bobby asked where he was. He was told that Mike had been arrested again for assault and being drunk and disorderly. Bobby then told Jack that he knew someone who could work for him. After this, Danny joined the team and started working. Danny, another victim of the job market, now picking up a hammer instead of a briefcase, Bobby thought as he watched his new colleague. Gene went to a bar and found Phil drinking. He offered to drive Phil home, but Phil told him he couldn't go home. His wife didn't want the neighbors to know he had been fired. "Want to go to the movies?" Phil suggested instead. Meanwhile, Bobby returned home and his mother told him someone named Fred Mund had called and offered him a position. Even though the job was in Boston, Bobby decided to go. Maggie was doubtful, but Bobby explained it was a vice president of sales and marketing position, exactly the kind of job he was qualified for. "This is it. This is me. This is my job," Bobby insisted. "I don't know what else I can look for. A vice president title again." Sounds like a dream, Bobby thought, except dreams don't usually come with fine print. Like they say in Argo, this is the best bad idea we have. Bobby went to Boston and stayed in a motel. In the morning, he went to an office for his interview, but he was told his appointment was actually scheduled for next week, not this Friday. Phil met James for lunch. He brought up a job opening for foreign executives that interested him, but James told him he couldn't hire anyone over 30 for that job. Apparently, decades of experience mean nothing if you're on the wrong side of 30, Phil thought bitterly. Later that night, Gene found Phil angrily throwing stones at the GTX building from a distance. Phil told him about his money problems, but there was nothing they could do. Back at his house, Phil washed the dishes. He then went to his garage and smoked before getting in his car. He closed the garage door, started his car, and took his own life through carbon monoxide poisoning. The next day, Gene, Bobby, and others attended Phil's funeral. A devastating but all too common end for those who feel like they've lost everything, Bobby thought sadly. After this, Bobby and Gene walked through the first place they had worked at. Gene talked about the old days with nostalgia. "Now, everything I spent 30 years trying to build for myself and everybody else is gone," Gene said sadly. Bobby then went back to his house and apologized to Maggie for letting her down, but she reassured him that everything would pass. The next day, Gene visited James at GTX and asked why he missed Phil's funeral. James avoided the question and spoke about Phil's wife. When Gene asked why he fired employees, James said it was needed to save the company. Later, Gene called Bobby to offer him a job. Bobby told Jack about it, saying he might stay, but Jack joked, "Take the job, you're a bad carpenter." Jean, now running his own company, McClary Maritime Associates, was visited by Sally. She congratulated him and asked to meet for lunch, but he said no. As she left, she asked him to consider her for a future role. Bobby then started his new job, welcomed the team, and got to work. Back in the corporate world, he felt ready. "We work just as hard here as we did looking for a job," he said.